Disclaimer: the views and opinions expressed in this episode are those of the guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of USA Global TV and Radio. The content presented is for informational purposes only and is intended to foster open discussion and debate. Viewer discretion is advised. USA Global TV and Radio does not endorse any particular viewpoint and encourages viewers to seek out additional information and perspectives. Saving America with Dr. David D. Schein.
Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio, where our mission is to provide education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. USA Global TV and Radio connects you with experts and audiences all around the world every single day to help you succeed in business and to live a richer life. Visit us at usaglobaltv.com to learn about career and life-changing training and mentoring programs like the Listening Mentor. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about our special programs and offers. Discover how you can become a guest on one of our shows or a host or producer of a USA Global TV and Radio show of your very own. That's USA Global TV and Radio, where the doctor is always in.
Welcome to Saving America. This is your host, Dr. David D. Schein. Slaughter of 6 hostages by Hamas terrorists. This is a continuation of the outrage that began with the atrocities by Hamas and some civilians on October 7, 2023. Of the many hostages taken that day, beyond the 1,200 killed, only about a third have been released. Many are already dead. The cowardly Hamas terrorists have resisted a ceasefire and they've hidden behind these innocent hostages and their own civilians. On the verge of being rescued by Israel Defense Forces, IDF, Hamas executed 6 hostages, 4 men and 2 women. Remember, these were unarmed civilians who were taken on October 7th, and there was no way for them to protect themselves. One of the men was an American Israeli citizen, Hirsch Goldberg, Poland. This further underscores the harm done by the weakness of the world stage, the Biden administration. It includes the administration's failure to fully support the work of the IDF to remove the terrorist threat of Hamas and other Iran-backed terrorists. Seeing the pictures of these 6 hostages brings tears to my eyes. I mean that literally. I can only express my regret and sympathy to the families of the 6 and the others killed on or still held hostage. At this point, I do not believe there will be a ceasefire until Hamas is completely destroyed. Harris explains flip-flopping. Her values have not changed. Whether you watch the CNN interview with Kamala Harris and Tim Walz or not, you most likely are aware of it. As expected, it was a softball interview without any tough follow-up questions. Harris has been criticized for having Walz there to back her up. This is clearly not a big press conference or interview that many, even on the slopstream side of the press, are demanding. About the most interesting admission by Harris in the short TV event was that her values have not changed. She has tried to walk back her statements on banning fracking and many other silly far-left statements. My interpretation is that she will lie to get elected, but if her values have not changed, she will follow her current course with the Biden administration on blocking fossil fuels in any way that she can. A zebra does not change its stripes. She again doubled down on the Green New Deal, despite the ridiculous way that it has been structured and its obvious failures to date. Of course, the Trump campaign jumped on her value statement and reminded voters that she supports virtually open immigration and a quick path to citizenship, and her earlier support for eliminating cash bail that has been listed as a factor in the significant increase in crime and recidivism in the United States. So the debate on September 10th, if it happens, is now queued up to be the critical point in the campaign for both sides. I believe the world is closest to a world war than it has been since the Cuban Missile Crisis over 50 years ago. The weakness of the Biden-Harris administration is being felt in the South Pacific as China has continued its bullying of its neighboring countries. The latest was a deliberate ramming of a Philippine Coast Guard ship by a CCP Coast Guard ship. This took place, note, in the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, causing damage to the ship and, of course, endangering the crew. This is a continuation of attacks that have taken place during August without a significant response from the Biden-Harris administration. I guess Harris is too busy campaigning and Biden is too busy sleeping on the beach in California. Illegals invading our country have become so bold that it is reported that a Venezuelan gang has taken control of 3 low-rent apartment complexes in Colorado. The report is from Mike Kaufman, mayor of the Aurora, Colorado, a suburb of Denver. Apparently, these gangs get into some units and then intimidate others who are there and even the landlords. I could understand a report like this coming from northern Mexico, but this should never be happening in the United States. I call on the Biden-Harris administration in the state of Colorado to dispatch National Guard and even Army troops to secure these American apartment complexes. The perpetrators should be jailed and held without bond until they're either imprisoned or deported. The attorneys general for about half the states have asked SCOTUS to block the new EPA methane standards for the oil and gas sector. The EPA claims that these new standards are part of its efforts to sharply reduce emissions of methane and other harmful air pollution from oil and natural gas operations. However, these attorneys general filed an emergency appeal to prevent the EPA from enforcing the rule that went into effect earlier this year. The basic claim is that the new EPA rules ignore the normal process for using certain technologies to achieve emission controls. Further, the 1- and 2-year time periods for implementation are simply too short. The supporting argument is that these new rules could be very costly, thereby imposing greater costs on consumers. This is an interesting development. High-profile and sometimes controversial Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton has announced that an undercover investigation is being conducted in 3 Texas counties due to concerns about active attempts to enroll non-citizens to vote. The Department of Motor Vehicles, DMV locations, provide voter registrations for citizens when they are registering their vehicles. So he asked, why were there nonprofits set up outside of the DMV locations offering to register people to vote? Paxson has reminded the public that registering to vote if you are not a citizen is a crime. It can result in up to 20 years in jail and a fine of up to $10,000. The president of Columbia University, Minouche Shafik, resigned in mid-August. She went directly to a new position in England. She may also have anticipated a major report on sweeping issues of anti-Semitism across the Columbia University campus. The report is full of detailed reports of Jewish students being personally attacked on campus, including having jewelry ripped off, being harassed out of their dorm rooms, and being blocked from walking around the campus. I remind my fellow Christians that we are right after the Jews if this harassment of Jewish students in synagogues is not addressed and halted now. This is not Lebanon. This is the United States. Universities like Columbia get substantial funds from the United States government. They must be held accountable. Former President Donald Trump said he will unfreeze the current federal moratorium on the death penalty on his first day in office to help fight crime. Apparently, the anti-American Attorney General Merrick Garland did this moratorium with the Biden-Harris administration all the way back in 2021. Sorry, folks, I missed this one. He claimed they wanted to review protocols for executions, whatever that means. In fairness, the Justice Department has pushed for the death penalty against suspects charged with mass shootings in Pittsburgh and Buffalo, so they can be given the death sentence by the jury. But if the feds are not actually executing these criminals, then the threat is not a deterrent. The report indicates that Trump will seek executions for drug dealers and cop killers with his focus on a national crackdown on crime. He also said he would seek the death penalty for those convicted of sexually abusing or trafficking children and drug dealers. This is particularly timely because of the recent deliberate killings of various police officers in the United States. This is a stunning development, and in my lifetime, I have never seen a situation like this. Frankly, it used to be that it was extremely rare for a policeman or a member of law enforcement to be killed, and usually it was just part of a gun battle or something like that, but we have had a series of what have been called executions. This must be investigated. We must crack down on this. I'm not tying this necessarily to illegal immigration. I don't know the direct cause of it, but something is wrong in America and it needs to be cleaned up now. I'm a strong supporter of the death penalty. Here in Texas, a 90-year-old man who helped many was outside of his car. A thug went up to him, shot him, grabbed his car, and then ran over him with his own car. The man died shortly thereafter. This thug deserves the death penalty, and I hope that is the result when he is hopefully caught and convicted soon. And I encourage anyone with any information on this situation to call your local law enforcement authorities. A report from the Journal of Nature claims that geologists may have solved the mystery of the origin of the altar stone at Stonehenge, England. The original theory was that the 6-ton altar stone came from about 150 miles away. Still very, very impressive. The new report is that the stone may actually have come 600 miles from northern Scotland. The difficulty of long-distance overland transport suggests that it was transported by sea. According to the article, it has been estimated that the construction of what we know as Stonehenge began as early as 3000 BC. However, the site may have been used as a worship location or gathering site as early as 10,000 BC. Saving America welcomes Dr. Matthew Garrett. He is recently retired professor of history and ethnic studies at Bakersfield College. Dr. Garrett's colleagues repeatedly elected him to campus-wide office, and he received numerous awards, including the institution's Lifetime Leadership Award in 2021. He is also an award-winning author with research and publications in Native American history, and his musings appear in both popular and academic journals. However, Dr. Garrett risked his reputation and tenure to question partisan policies and expenditures at his college. He rallied 24 faculty at his institution to found the Renegade Institute for Liberty, dedicated to civil debate on matters of public interest and to advocate for Western ideals like free speech, free markets, and equal treatment under the law. In 2020, his college issued disciplinary action, and it was circulated to the local media, and Garrett responded with a First Amendment lawsuit in 2021. That suit was later amended to reflect continued retaliation, and after a lengthy legal proceeding, Dr. Garrett and Kern Community College District have agreed on a significant settlement that has made national headlines. Before we begin our interview with Dr. Garrett, here is the statement of the Kern Community College District. It has, to quote, settled all issues with Matthew Garrett. To be clear, the dispute with Matthew Garrett was a disciplinary matter due to his disruptive actions on campus, none of which concerned freedom of speech. Kern Community College District unequivocally supports the right for our students and faculty to share their views and opinions on campus and elsewhere. As this is a confidential personnel matter, we will not comment further. Whoa. I also want to acknowledge that I was a guest on the Bakersfield College campus through Dr. Garrett a couple of years ago. Our series of interviews for Saving America establishes that the world truly is full of interesting people. We welcome Dr. Matthew Garrett for his first appearance on Saving America.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay, you didn't doze off while we were doing that long introduction?
No.
Okay. First of all, tell our audience how DEI factored into your dispute with Bakersfield College.
Sure. Well, following the death of George Floyd in 2020, there was a new fervor that crossed the nation, and our college was no different. There in Bakersfield, which had always really been a very moderate, non-political sort of entity, our campus leadership held some meetings and rolled out this new racial equity commitment. And of course, I would imagine your listeners are familiar with the concept of equity. It's about adjusting, controlling outcomes to make sure everything is the same. So racial equity would be to ensure that all racial groups have the same outcomes. And so along with that came a flurry of new programs. We're going to start recruiting faculty based on their race. They instituted a new acronym, which I'd never heard before, URMs, underrepresented minorities, who are going to receive favoritism in employment. And of course, this is not legal in California, which in 1996 banned racial preferences. It is legal in some states to do some sort of quotas and things, but not in California. And so there was this flurry of new activity, energy, new DEI speakers brought in. There was one gentleman they contracted repeatedly and paid him hundreds of thousands of dollars to tell us his political views about why we need to treat one racial group different than another. I remember one contract was $180,000 for 42 hours of trainings. And Dave, you're better at math than me, I think, because of the business background. But I think that's something like $4,200 an hour for
Pretty
DEI
close.
training. So this sort of just insanity was grinding on a lot of us. And so I organized faculty, we discussed, we debated, we raised concerns, pointed out some of the expenditure problems, questioned why money was going to partisan groups, organized a petition to the board to ask them to not approve the racial quotas. The board ignored us and moved forward with the racial quotas, said they needed to reduce white employee population from something like 60% down to 24%, and needed to increase Hispanic population from 30% to 60% or something like that. And so there was this real aggressive move, and we started to ask questions that really grinded, I think, onto the social justice advocates. They did not like having those discussions. They didn't want to defend those positions. And so it escalated with sort of nasty emails on campus and committee room discussions. It escalated until October 2022, when one of the social justice leaders, a woman who leads the racially segregated classes, brought her students to a meeting, and then her students began accusing me and a couple others of some sort of racial misconduct during a meeting. They didn't know that I recorded that meeting, and so we had clear evidence that they were making it up, but they went from venue to venue spouting these allegations and eventually manipulating the Board of Trustees to believe and take incorrect action based on those allegations.
Wow, something else. Our second question, how did the statement from one of the members of the Kern Community College District Board of Trustees factor into your own situation? He wanted to cull, C-U-L-L, the conservative faculty and take them to the slaughterhouse. So it sounds like he was treating you like cattle.
Yeah, that's Trustee John Corkins, who's a rancher. And when this race hoax was brought to the board, and they brought in a faculty member, a student, a couple of community activists, none of these people have I ever even met, were ranting on about how white supremacy was overrunning the school and it was all my fault and students were being threatened and this just utter nonsense allegations. In response to that, Trustee Corkins articulated how it was hard to get rid of bad faculty and that he'd really like to treat them like he does his cattle, which is to take us out to his slaughterhouse and end our lives, which was just horribly gruesome, violent language. And really, I don't have any anger or animus towards him over it. I understand if he believed those things to be true, I understand him being concerned about them. But I think I pity him because it speaks to his naivete that he would believe these really vague, silly, obviously self-contradictory sort of comments. And it really put him in a bad light. It put the position of the school in a bad light. As we went forward to the hearing, it became obvious that everything was manufactured. And I think it left he and the district on the hook for quite a bit of damages. Faculty, not just me, but other faculty feel very much afraid, intimidated, silenced. There's a recent climate survey that was conducted where dozens and dozens of employees say they're afraid to speak because of this sort of climate, that they know that if they have the wrong viewpoints, they'll be targeted by a social justice leader. They'll manipulate the board to attack them. The human resources or whoever else will target them. And the entire system will come against them if they dare to express a different opinion. So I think that the comment carries a lot of weight and did a lot of damage.
Wow. Well, and our third question is a little bit of change of pace, because you have now, as we've talked about, been really through the ringer. What is your best advice you can give to a conservative college faculty member in a liberal college, which of course most of them are at the moment?
Yeah, I think that before you do anything, you need to understand that it's a difficult path to go down. It's better to just be left alone, right? Tenure isn't what people think it is. In California, at least, tenure just means that before you're fired, you have the right to a hearing, an administrative court hearing, and that can be quite expensive. The state has essentially unlimited funds at its disposal. In my case, by the time we settled, I had already lost $500,000 in legal fees and back wages by the time we agreed to a settlement. So unless you're prepared to really do that, they're going to try and starve you out. But if you're prepared to go that route, if you're willing to risk it all to defend, truth, virtues of Western society, like equal treatment under the law and free speech, then there are some steps that I would recommend. One of them is to make sure you have a group of trusted people, because you want some that are public and some that are not so public, because it makes it harder for them to target you. In my case, half the department chairs had signed their names next to mine. There was a lot of institutional strength from that side to make it hard to sort of pick on me a little bit. They still did, but it gave me quite a bit of strength. And then private friends as well. When we got to the hearing, I was shocked at the outright lies that people would say under oath. And it was really quite helpful to have them then turn to committee chairs and say, that's what happened, right? And then the committee chairs would say, no, that's not what happened. And so it was really advantageous to have quite a few friends who were committed to telling the truth because they weren't out to get me. That's not always an option though, right? Another thing to do is to record everything. I recorded everything. I recorded every public meeting I could legally record, and I recommend the same to everyone else, because that's what really saved me. They made up all sorts of lies, and a recording made the difference. Also, emails, oh my goodness. They made all sorts of crazy statements that we could easily disprove by email. So make sure you're keeping records. Also, I'd say pick your punches. You can't fight every single thing, right? There's just too much of it. It's crazy. So in my case, the first thing I really took issue with was I gave a lecture on free speech, the importance of free speech, and how I was concerned that social justice activities were infringing on free speech. Now, they went ahead and disciplined me for that anyway, but that was a particularly, I was aware of the optics. I didn't think that they would really be foolish enough to discipline a speech on free speech, but you never really know. But choose your optics, and that really helps also with building community relations. I think that's a key. It's building community relations. And in my case, we probably buried the Board of Trustees in hundreds of letters from the community demanding, outraged by what was going on campus. And so that entailed me having to go to committee meeting groups and saying, look, here's what's going on. Here's some of the evidence. You really should be concerned about the loss of your institution, this ideological capture of your college. And I didn't sign up to be an activist. I didn't want to go to all these meetings, but that became an important part of sort of building a defense against it. And then I think the other thing that I wish I had done was I wish I had fundraised from the very start. I started a fundraiser at the end when it got pretty desperate, but I wish I had started at the beginning, because, as I mentioned to you earlier, this is incredibly expensive. And I didn't launch it earlier because I didn't want to feel like I was exploiting people or anything for money. But as it became hundreds of thousands of dollars and I was in way over my head financially, I wish I had started that earlier. So as soon as they begin to target you, maybe it's not too early to start a fundraiser to challenge for a legal defense fee for whatever might come along or something.
Fascinating situation. How can our audience get more information about you and about some of the struggles that you faced?
Well, I'm despite suddenly becoming this public figure activist, I'm really not that public. I don't have a web page. I don't have much of an active Twitter account. But you could find information, I suppose, by Google. There's a lot of news stories. Fox has done coverage. The College Fix and Just the News have both done excellent coverage on the case. I have a GoFundMe fundraiser page that I've suspended, no longer collecting funds, but it still exists. And if you visit that page, you can find a link to quite a few older articles. Authors like Jonathan Turley have addressed it. It's showed up in all sorts of venues. So there's quite a bit of media out there that can be read about, though you're not likely to find much of me on the web. I don't have that much of a presence.
The murder of Harris County Deputy Sheriff Maher Husseini attracts national attention. On September 3rd, a Harris County sheriff was shot to death in his car on the way to work. The sheriff was Maher Husseini, whose friends and family report was truly one of the good guys. From the beginning, it appeared that this was a targeted shooting. It turns out the story behind this senseless tragedy was even stranger. The alleged shooter was Arthur Muraday. He fled the scene of the shooting, was spotted the next day in Galveston, about 50 miles from Houston. A police pursuit ensued where he crashed his car into Galveston Bay. Then, bizarrely, he tried to swim away from the police. He was apprehended within 45 minutes, apparently with the assistance of a canine dog. He was treated for minor injuries and later jailed in Galveston. As his story is recorded, he is being transferred to Houston with a request by authorities that he be held without bond. Sheriff Husseini was also a partner in a security business, Jaguar Security, based here in Houston, Texas. Muraday had security companies in Dallas, Texas. Apparently, Muraday and Husseini had some contact about a year ago, according to the Jaguar Security co-owner. There was a suggestion that Muraday may have been upset about losing some business to Jaguar Security. That's not clear. Local TV Channel 2 reports that several of Muraday's businesses in Dallas had their charters revoked over the last 2 years. I saw some of the paperwork on it. It's official from the state government of Texas. Not surprisingly, Muraday's sister was interviewed by local press and said that her brother was suffering a mental breakdown. Given the behavior reported, he may be indeed laying the foundation for an insanity defense. In this time when there have been far too many of our heroes in blue killed and injured, this story is even more compelling given the person behind the headline. I extend my sympathy to the family of the victim and to the others impacted by this senseless tragedy. 3 American service members dead, 35 wounded in the Iranian-backed drone attack in Jordan. Since October 7th, Iran proxies have attacked U.S. and allied interests about 150 times. Shipping in the Suez Canal has been disrupted by itself, causing major financial losses. What has the Biden administration done? Nearly nothing. Recently, Houthi encampments have been bombed by American and British forces, but it's not made a dent in their attacks on the U.S. assets and its allies. Now, the predictable result, a drone attack killed 3 of our brave service members and injured about 3 dozen more. 8 of those had to be taken to Germany for more intensive medical care. The blood of these dead and injured is on the hands of Biden and his administration. And this includes the hapless Lloyd Austin, who was MIA for at least 2 weeks recently. This is clearly Biden's responsibility. He has had the worst cabinet since, I don't know, in the history of America, since we started having cabinet members, if there's been a worse cabinet or a worse president. Many of our audience know that my late father was career military. I am sure that he is rolling over in his grave given the senseless loss of life that could have been prevented by prompt and severe results for anyone attacking the U.S. and its allies. What needs to happen? Swift and decisive responses for sure. Number one, enforce prior and new sanctions on Iran's business. When they're broke, they can't send millions of dollars worth of armaments to other terrorists. Seize ships going in and out of Iran with arms or oil on them. No more Mr. Nice Guys. No chance to make money to buy more drones. 3, bomb into oblivion any spot on Earth that launches an attack on U.S. or its allied assets. Stop interfering in the Israeli-Hamas war and send Israel the armaments that it needs to continue to exterminate these subhumans in Hamas and their supporters. Number 5, America needs to review its membership in the UN, not in UNRWA, the particular committee they recently found out had people in that operation under the UN who were involved in the atrocities of October 7th. What? How can this be happening? The UN is no longer a friend of the United States. It's not a friend of the civilized world. What do we need to do? We need to evict them from their cushy headquarters in New York. We need to tell them, hey, find another place to practice your Marxist nonsense, pro-terrorist nonsense. And it's time for the United States to continue to work with its true allies in NATO, the Pacific Rim, and so forth. And last, seal America's borders. Collect the terrorists who are already here. Don't send them back. They'll just be back, or they'll launch attacks from another country. Put them in Gitmo for life. And remember, people in Gitmo do not get American benefits of state-appointed attorneys and things like that. There's no due process if you're a terrorist. Lock them up at Gitmo, expand Gitmo. That's what we need to do. Americans should contact their senators and Congress members and push the plan above. Let's get tough folks to the elected officers who will protect America in the future. As we grow up, a common reference for success or failure is the letter grade. Whether we're in grammar school or college, we all want an A grade and certainly regard an F as a big failure. Here at Saving America, we scan the news for reports of celebrities, politicians, or others who just end up in the public eye. So the A grades are awarded to people and organizations for great service to their communities, and the F grades, of course, are unfortunately more common, are awarded to those who need to do a lot better. The badge of dishonor belongs to the communist scum on the National Labor Relations Board, or NLRB. Not all of the members, there's 5 members. They're appointed politically, and you can guess what party has the majority position at the moment. And they recently decided, just on their own, that the secret ballot elections, which is a significant control to avoid illegal activities by the unions and by employers, can now be avoided. When one neo-Marxist, Franklin Roosevelt, was running the country, one measure was the passage of the National Labor Relations Act in 1935 during the heart of the Great Depression. It did have to go through some court challenges, but basically following that, the United States rapidly unionized, and almost all industrial activity, transportation, whatever it was, became unionized in a big hurry. Only some classically low-wage jobs like restaurants and stuff, even some of them got unionized, but generally it was in the industrial sector. And so to operate the NLRA, the Act created the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, again with 5 people, usually 3 from one party, 2 from the other party. And what's interesting to me about this is that it is not in the Department of Labor. It is a separate agency. They're in some fancy, I've been there, they're in some fancy office space up with the lobbyists in Washington, D.C. They're not in the U.S. Department of Labor in the plain buildings with the metal desks. So I find that kind of interesting by itself. When I'm dictator for the day, all of this will be under one department, simplify life a lot. In any event, the law created a situation where you had mass unionization over a very brief period of time from about 1935 to 1940. And then what happened is, of course, Pearl Harbor, the United States enters World War II, and unions were prohibited from striking during that time period. Now, some of the unions did strike anyway, but that was met with the Army going in and forcing people to go back to work and other really crazy stuff. However, the war ended in 1945. By this time, Harry Truman was president because FDR had passed away in office. And what happened at that point was something that's pretty interesting, because then the unions went on strike, and there were massive strikes across the United States, just crippled the United States industrial activity at a key time when people who had not been able to buy cars for 4 years, refrigerators or whatever, could suddenly buy these things. And so the demand was there, but the production was not, because the unions went on these massive strikes. So in any event, 1947 comes along, and Congress puts together the first set of reforms of the National Labor Relations, and basically create a little bit more balance between unions, which were given free run from 1935 until that point, to give a little bit more balance, give a little more power to the employers to at least have some opportunity to oppose unionization. Now, that was Truman, who was elected by the unions, vetoed it. To give you an idea how strong things were, it passed over the veto of Truman. So it was kind of a really interesting situation. So the reason why I'm concerned about what's happening right now is the current demand of the auto workers for a 46% pay raise and a 4-day work week. This is 3 times the official inflation rate, even under the Biden administration. And last I heard, they are looking at putting 140,000 auto workers out on the street. And I, frankly, just speaking for myself as a management advocate, hope that the automakers will hang tight, because if not, we're going to see even more inflation in this country, and auto prices are already out of touch for most Americans to buy a new car. I expect that would get even worse if the automakers roll over on these unreasonable, ridiculous demands. In any event, when you want to form a union, the idea was the union would get out and would have to have at least 30% of the employees sign cards. Now, this is often done at bars and places, ice houses here in Texas, where hourly workers at manufacturing companies hang out. So there's only one side involved, and a lot of times it's personal pressure. So, you know, a union organizer will buy them a few beers and then say, hey, how about signing this card? And if the other guy doesn't want a union, he'll say, hey, you're going to get to do a secret election. You know, you don't have to vote for us at that point. So the guy signs the card. Well, he doesn't realize that if he signs a lot of, the union organizer gets a lot of cards, this guy may end up with a union whether he planned to vote for one or not. So this is a very serious situation. And so now that brings us to the CMEX decision by the current commies on the National Labor Relations Board, at least the majority. And what it says, the unions are now going to be automatically recognized if they get 50% of the cards in the bargaining unit. Again, there's no interference or no opportunity for the employer to give back. At that point, the employer is going to have to demand that there be an election. The employer will only have 2 weeks to do that. I think most employers in the United States will demand it within 24 hours, at least if I have anything to do with it. But it's a very troublesome situation. But there's a second part of the CMEX decision that's even more troubling. Another part of CMEX decision, union alleges unfair labor practices. The acronym is ULPs. Anybody in the labor business knows what a ULP is. What happens is anytime the union loses an election, they allege ULPs. Doesn't mean that they really did have ULPs committed by the employer. The unions always allege them. Well, in this situation, if the unions run in after they lose an election and say to the NLRB, hey, we lost the election, the employers did all these bad things, ULPs, the NLRB will order the employer to negotiate with the union without further consideration and without rerunning the election, which is the normal remedy if there's an allegation that the election was filed up by the employer. So this is a very difficult situation. I do not expect the Biden administration to do anything to help this situation. In fact, I think they will come out on the union side. Although, interestingly, Biden was asked if he thought the auto union was going on strike, and he said, no, I don't know that he consulted his handlers before he made that quick reply. So one of the things to look at here is the reality is that less than 10% of the American workforce is unionized, and it's very heavily concentrated in transportation, the few heavy industries like auto workers, and of course our nearby refineries here along the Gulf Coast. And other than that, there's just not a lot of unions involved in things. So the America today is very different than the American workforce in 1935. And one of the things that I think is very interesting about this is that virtually all of the job growth in the United States has taken place in what are called right-to-work states. Now, a lot of people confuse that concept with employment at will. It's not. What it says is if your company gets unionized in a right-to-work state, you have the right not to pay union dues and not to be involved with the union. Now, to my surprise, the ill-considered governor up in Michigan has decided that they would withdraw from right to work. And I think that is an idiotic decision and will in turn encourage even further growth of industry and businesses in the Great South, particularly Texas, across the Great South into Florida and up toward North Carolina and Virginia. And so I think it's just a very stupid thing for any state to do. Personally, I think right to work should be the law of the entire United States. And it is the law in about a third of the states at the present time. So, Saving America awards its not coveted F grade to the members of the NLRB who are destroying American workers' right to vote for a union or not.
Saving America welcomes John R. Miles. He's an entrepreneur, award-winning podcast host, former U.S. Navy officer, and a Fortune 50 senior executive. He is a leading authority on intentional behavior change. He is the author of Passion Struck, 12 Powerful Principles to Unlock Your Purpose and Ignite Your Most Intentional Life. These principles are applied to a person's mindset and behavior. Miles discovered these by examining and interviewing successful professionals such as Mark Bainoff, David Rubenstein, Katie Milkman, Bernie Marcus, Yuri Levine, Marshall Goldsmith, Robin Sharma, Susan Cain, Sean Springs, Thaddeus Bullard, Elon Musk, Susan Wojcicki, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, Navy SEALs astronaut Chris Cassidy, and General Stanley McChrystal, who we see on the news occasionally. His book, Passion Struck, is a gold winner as recognized by the Nonfiction Authors Association. Our series of interviews for Saving America establishes that the world is full of interesting people. We welcome John Miles for his first appearance on Saving America.
Oh, David, such an honor to be here and love the name of your podcast and also your book that you wrote about on the same topic.
Thank you so much, John. So let's get our audience up to speed on what you're up to. So you were describing a very specific area of expertise. Please share with the audience how you came to pursue this specific type of research.
I think we are best positioned to serve the person who we once were. And in my case, I was living what many people would call the dream life. I found myself in the C-level of a Fortune 50 organization. We were making $60 billion in revenue, and I should have been the happiest, most fulfilled in my entire career. And I felt just the opposite, completely lost, out of control in many ways with the way my life was going from a personal perspective, because I was living it in a very unbalanced way. And I was so much consumed with my career that I was letting in retrospect, the most important elements of my life, my health, my mental health, my relationships, etc., take second fiddle to this all-encompassing growth track that I found myself on. And I don't think I'm immune to the fact of this happening. I think so many people live life today as I was, which Henry David Thoreau coined as quiet desperation, where we find ourselves stuck in this spot where we're living the life we feel we should be living and not the ideal life that we've been put on earth to do. And so what I've really documented is my own personal, what I call me search and path to going from where I was to doing the career and life that I have now. And so what I found was at the core of all of that was living life intentionally, meaning I really discovered that it's the intentional choices that we make, the micro choices that make up the moments, the seconds, the minutes, the hours of our every single day of life that we live that ultimately culminate into what I like to call the tsunami of greatness or the waterfall of despise. And you can choose to live your life wisely and end up in one scenario, or choose to live it the other way and end up in that valley of despair. And so that's what this whole movement is really about, is how do you create intentional choices every single day that get you closer to living your self-realized self.
Wow, what a powerful statement. So explain to our audience how your book, Passion Struck, can help people in various fields of work, because we're not all office workers and things like that. So how does that work?
So people often have asked me, looking back on your life, what would you tell your 20-something-year-old self? And my response is, I would give them a copy of this book, because I wrote Passion Struck not just for the office workers, as you said, but anyone who fits one of these different profiles. Perhaps you're a high achiever no matter where you're at, but you're stagnant or you're stuck where you're at. How do you break through and, as Marshall Goldsmith said, get from where you're at to where you want to be? The other group of people are those who feel really stuck in their life, and they find themselves in that quiet desperation that I found myself in, and they don't know how to break through the chasm of the life they've created to the one that they could, if they're intentional about it, create for themselves. And then the last group of people would be new college graduates or young adults who are looking to chart their course in life. So I kind of oriented it so it would fit any one of those. And I think, similar to your books, what I am realizing is that not only the United States, but most Western countries are in a period of decades of decline. I mean, if you look at the charts on entrepreneurship, which made the United States the envy of everyone else worldwide, we're in 4 to 5 decades of decline, and it's not ending. And I believe a big reason for this is we have decided in so many cases to take the path like I took, which was the safe path. I came out of my time as a military officer, and when my opportunity to go in the FBI didn't happen, I ended up in the business world. And there was a point during that trajectory when I was at Arthur Andersen, actually in Houston, where you're based, where the whole company, because of the Enron fiasco, disintegrated before my eyes, right as I was putting on partner. So the timing couldn't have been any worse. And I had a chance at that point to go down the entrepreneurial route myself. But I think I was conditioned to kind of see that the way that my life was going was to work for a company, work my way up, do the classical type of job structure that my father did. And I think a lot of people are entrapped in that thinking, and not thinking of how your life could be different. And I really believe that with the onset of all the digital disruption that's around us, AI, robotics, etc., that life as we know it in work, regardless of what industry you're in, is completely evolving. And the one thing that you can do to take charge is to live your life as if you are a constant learning machine. Because the one thing that you're going to need to do if you want to be able to take charge of your career and your life with all the change around us is to stay ahead of it. So that's what the book really teaches you, is how to use passion, perseverance, and intentionality, all coupled with a constant learning mindset, to really create the path to a life that feels fulfilling and allows you to really outplay the forces that are going to completely disrupt millions and millions of lives over the next 2 decades.
It's such an impressive situation, and I can certainly relate to that. As you know, we ask 3 questions and we try and keep it short. So you've got 12 principles in your book. We don't have time to cover all of that, but would you like to share with our audience a couple examples, 2 or 3 examples, so they'll know what to see or expect in your book?
Sure. The book is created out of 3 different sections. The first one and the second one all go into these shifts or principles that I talk about. 6 of them are mindset shifts and 6 of them are behavior shifts. And then the last section of the book I call the psychology of progress, is really using behavior science, psychology, and neuroscience to implement them into your life. So out of the 12 principles, a few that might resonate with people. One would be the mosquito auditor. I'd like to use metaphors so that people would remember these concepts. And this has been a fan favorite. I happen to be listening to a radio program where the announcer asked, "What is the most dangerous animal on the planet?" And like all the listeners who were calling in, we all got it wrong. We were all thinking sharks or lions, spiders, this, that. It turns out that it's the mosquito. And even today, as we're recording this, on the front page of the Wall Street Journal was another mosquito-borne illness that is starting to go global.
Yes.
So the reason why I ended up doubling down on this is mosquitoes by themselves feel so benign. I mean, oftentimes we'll hear their buzzing, but we don't really take them seriously in much of the Western world because we get bitten, we have some itching, we don't think that they do much harm, but that's really not the case in much of the world where it's killing millions of people each year. The same thing go for the invisible influences in our lives. And I lay out in the book 3 different types of mosquitoes. They're more than this, but I thought this was 3 clear examples: the bloodsucker, the invisible suffocator, and the pain in the ass. So that is one chapter, and I write it in a way for your personal life, and I also go through examples for your career as well. I think in the second section, where I go into the behavioral shifts, there are a number here that are really important, but I'll go to the last one. I wrote this chapter on the concept of being a conscious engager. And I was really exploring here all the distractions in life that are keeping us from becoming the best person that we can become. And people often say, you know, John, you're living your life on autopilot. And I think it's the wrong analogy, because on autopilot, at least the plane is going in typically a positive direction. I think the better analogy that I explore is that we're living our lives more like we're pinballs aimlessly drifting through the game of pinball, not controlling the pinball, but letting the game play us. And I think it's a great analogy for how so many of us live our lives. And in this chapter, I really explore the wisdom of Stephen Covey, specifically his adage that the main thing about the main thing is keeping the main thing the main thing. And so oftentimes, as we chart our course, we have a main thing, which is typically the values that we live our lives against. Yet, with all the distraction around us, they often get pushed to the wayside. And I think it's when that happens, we find ourselves living unintentionally, just going through the motions like the aimless pinball. And I go through much more exploration than that. But those are just 2 quick examples of the 12 principles.
Really amazing, John. Sounds like a tremendous book. How can our audience get more information about you and your book?
Well, thank you for asking me that. The best two ways would either be to go to the company website that I'm a part of, Passionstruck, PASSIONSTRUCK, just like the book behind me, or my personal website, John, middle initial R, Miles.com. You can find the book wherever books are, and you can find my podcast, Passionstruck, wherever podcasts are.
Business students, business persons, or consumers, business law impacts much of what you do. This segment is designed to help you get past the headlines on key stories. Rudy Giuliani appears to have scored a rare legal win, or did he? Anyone who follows the news knows that Rudy Giuliani, also once known as America's mayor, has had some tough times over the last few years. A bankruptcy court just dismissed Rudy's case at his request. This is very rare, since usually people in bankruptcy want the case to continue until a resolution with the debts compromised or forgiven. Rudy asked that his Chapter 11 bankruptcy case be dismissed, since this will allow him to appeal a $148 million defamation judgment against him. This, however, will make him susceptible to other lawsuits and judgments that are pending against him. One article that I read said that he cannot file for bankruptcy again for 12 months. This is actually misleading. He cannot file a Chapter 11 again. However, I would think that Chapters 7 and 13, which are both used by individuals and consumers, may be possible. The bankruptcy court froze all other civil litigation against Giuliani, including the defamation cases from election technology companies and a lawsuit from Noel Dunphy, who accuses him of sexual abuse. Nearly all of Giuliani's current debt was, however, the $148 million judgment in Washington, D.C. This was a jury award to Ruby Freeman and Wandrea Moss. These were two election workers he allegedly defamed by claiming they manipulated votes in Georgia. I think many of us saw some video of things happening in an election place after the doors had been closed. I believe that may be in reference to that. I'm not really sure. Giuliani's assets, in contrast to the $148 million judgment, are only evaluated at $10 million, specifically being a condo in New York City and a condo in Florida. Apparently, there are serious allegations that the creditors are not getting the straight story on Rudy's finances. So Rudy has taken a big risk that he will reverse or substantially reduce this big defamation verdict against him, and that he can also handle other legal exposures during this same time. Note that Giuliani has already lost his New York bar card and may soon lose his DC bar card. He also faces criminal charges in Arizona and Georgia. A lot of this is tied to his concerns about the integrity of the 2020 presidential election. I'm actually have in the works a new law journal article regarding law licenses being taken away from persons who are actively involved in some of these cases. It is very unusual for an attorney to lose their bar card, but it seems that some of these attorneys have been targeted to have their bar cards removed. So it's a tough situation out there. It'll be interesting to see what happens with America's mayor. Thanks for joining me for Saving America. If you have questions or comments, please find me on various social media sites. I'm Dr. David D. Schein, and I will see you next week.
Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio, where our mission is to provide education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. USA Global TV and Radio connects you with experts and audiences all around the world every single day to help you succeed in business and to live a richer life. Visit us at usaglobaltv.com to learn about career and life-changing training and mentoring programs like the Listening Mentor. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about our special programs and offers. Discover how you can become a guest on one of our shows or a host or producer of a USA Global TV and radio show of your very own. That's USA Global TV and Radio, where the doctor is always in.